the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Let's go to Robert now in St. Augustine, Florida.
Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I'm going to try my best to say this in the most coherent way. So we know that Jesus was fully God and fully human at the same time.
Right.
So regarding his miracles and his power, did he have the full power of God and out of his humility only reveal his power in certain circumstances, like what we read in the scriptures?
Mm-hmm.
Or when he was incarnate as a human being, did he lose the power of God and then he had to ask God the Father for the power of God to perform these miracles?
Yeah, I understand your question. This is a deep Christological issue here. And what I would say is this, that, of course, from the moment of his conception in his humanity, from the moment of the incarnation occurring, he is God as a person. So the subject of this human nature is divine as a person. And in his human nature, the Lord had all of the perfections of human nature. So there was nothing about his human nature that was either imperfect or deficient in some way. So he had the perfect human nature, but it was still subject to the limitations of human nature. So his mind, his will, his emotions, his body, everything that's associated with human nature, the Lord had in its perfection. But he still had to learn, like when he was little, he had to learn how to talk and he had to learn how to walk and, tie his sandals and whatever the other things were that he had to learn as he was growing up, as all of us do. And so the mystery of the incarnation is that the divine nature and he as a divine person did not overwhelm his humanity. And that's a mysterious thing. We can't really visualize or imagine that, but we know it's true. So when it comes to, as far as like questions about Jesus not having the power, he always had the power, always. Or as it says in Philippians chapter 2, we can see this in verses 6 and forward. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Jesus Christ, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. So that part there is a mystery into itself. What does it mean that he would grasp divinity? I have a thought on what that means here. Verse 7 says, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even death on a cross. So that, to me, indicates, number one, that he knew he was God, and the church fathers who comment on this say that from the moment of his conception in the incarnation, in his humanity, not only did he have the beatific vision from the very first moment, but he also knew he was God. In his human mind, he knew he was God. And yet, in this mysterious way, when it says he emptied himself, that means that he didn't appear to us in blazing glory. He didn't appear to us with some of this radiance of his divinity showing forth. He appeared in, as it says here, in the form of a servant. So I think part of this emptying himself was that in the incarnation, what we saw was his humanity. And so when he says, although he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God as a thing to be grasped, this is speaking here about the Lord's humanity, because he is God. He always was God. He always will be God. That could never cease. He didn't stop being God, in other words, for 33 years and then resume his divinity again. He always was God from the very first moment of the incarnation. But in his external appearance, in his humility, in his manner of life, his asceticism, all of these things, to me, indicate that for his purposes, he did not make use of his divinity in day-to-day things, aside from things like miracles and casting out devils and things like that. And there's so much more. I mean, this is like a very important part of Christology, and books, and many books have been written on topics like this one. So in short form, that's what I would say, Robert. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I would agree. I wonder if, as humans, as he was fully human as well, when he performed miracles like walking on the water and turning water into wine, as a human being, was he unable to do that? And he had to ask God the Father of the Trinity, for that power? Or did Jesus already have that power himself?
He did have the
he
power.
Asking permission?
Well, not exactly. I wouldn't put it quite that way. The thing to remember is that Jesus is God, number one, as a person. He's a divine person. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's John 1:1 and forward. And then in verse 14 it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So the acting person in Jesus of Nazareth is a divine person. And there's no way to separate that because he's perfectly united with his human nature. But in his human nature, when he says things, for example, the Father is greater than I, or where he says, I ascend to your God and my God, referring to the Father, he obviously couldn't say that in terms of his divinity, because God doesn't have a God. God is God. But in his humanity, he is a creature. The human nature of Jesus is a creature. The highest creature there ever was. So that's where it can be a little confusing. So it wasn't as though Jesus couldn't perform a miracle unless he stopped and said, Father, can I do this miracle? Because being God, he could do anything. He could do anything he wanted as a person in the triune God. But I think that's getting back to what we were talking about in terms of Philippians 2, where in his humanity, he would pray to the Father. For example, in the Garden of Eden, or the Garden of Gethsemane, big difference. Father, if it's possible for this cup to pass from me, but not my will, but thine be done. So he was asking the Father to allow this to not happen, because he knew, of course, what was going to happen, and it was frightening to him, as it would be for anybody. But his will was perfectly in line with the Father. So there we see examples of where he does ask the Father, but it's in his humanity. And I know we keep saying this, but it's important to make this distinction when we're considering the Incarnation. Otherwise, there's no way to make any sense of it. But if we keep the two realities of Jesus that are simultaneous, but if we keep them distinct in our minds, then we can see, how is it that after Jesus as a boy was found in the temple, and we're told he went back with his parents to Nazareth and lived under their authority, and he grew in wisdom and grace? How can that be if he's God? God can't change. He can't grow into wisdom and grace. That's referring to his humanity. Can I recommend a couple books that I think will help you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So really the main one is called The Incarnate Lord, a Thomistic Study. So The Incarnate Lord is the title, and the subtitle is A Thomistic Study in Christology. And the author is Father Thomas Joseph White, who, by the way, is now the rector of the Angelicum University in Rome. He's a brilliant man. He's American. And this is an extremely helpful look at all the questions pertaining to the relationship between the Lord's divinity and his humanity. This entire episode of The Patrick Madrid Show is on the Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free and updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers. Don't delay. Download the app today. And thanks for listening.